Okay, there you go. So keep talking, keep talking. Everywhere you go, people are coming to church and they say it's because of Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, loads of times. So I would say everywhere I've gone in 2018, that has been a story from at least one person, if not a whole handful of people. They've said Jordan Peterson was the gateway drug. He bread pilled me or whatever. You just get talking to these 20-something guys mainly, and they just start talking about, I realized that I need to take more responsibility for my life. And as you press into, so who are your influences and who are you listening to online? And, Peterson. Oh, so, yeah. Shocked face. And then we get into, yeah. Isn't he one of those basket of deplorables type characters? But yeah, they usually look over both shoulders before confiding in me that they too have partaken of Jordan. But it's a really interesting movement, and seeing you interact with people on a weekly basis, for whom that's been the story.
Tell me something about how Peterson lands your take on it in the UK, because it's obviously different in different contexts. And he's had some of his more, I was just watching the GQ UK edition interview that went up a couple of days ago. And that again was one of the more combative interviews. So right. How is he received in the UK? I mean, do people have to, read 12 rules for life inside of a Playboy magazine? Is that Playboy?
That's right. Yeah.
I'm really reading Playboy.
The real contraband is Jordan. Yeah.
Peterson.
In a brown paper bag, knock twice and ask for reg. Yeah. Partly that is the UK's style of, thank you so much. Got a cup of tea's coming here. You might want to clip that bit out. But,
I never edit.
Sandy is now a superstar. Okay. Did I say thank you? I don't even think I said thank you.
That's all the noise here.
That's no problem. I don't even think I said thank you. And now this is being broadcast to thousands of people. My rudeness.
That's
I will thank Sandy later. Yeah.
Christians are such cads.
I know. I think you've got to factor in the combative nature of UK journalism as well. I think in the last 25 years, there's been a real style of journalism that is the attack dog thing, that Cathy Newman was just one example of an entire breed of journalists that are just like that in the UK. So one of the reasons I was so glad to see Jordan kind of get one over on Cathy Newman was nothing to do with Cathy Newman, but just to do with that whole movement of attack dog journalism, going for the gotcha, and then it was Jordan who got the gotcha. So that's what made it so delicious. So partly you've got to factor in that style of journalism, partly you've got to factor in that the UK is a lot more left of center than the US more generally. But then I guess it's quite similar to Canada in that way. But I went and saw Jordan just 6 days ago up in Oxford, and I was expecting to see an audience of the basket of deplorables up close and personal, and it's just a regular Oxford crowd, men and women, all ages, really, really resonating with him. And he looked dog-tired, absolutely dog-tired, but everyone hanging on his every word, and yeah, just an interesting phenomenon.
Did he take questions?
He did. He woke up for the questions. That was good.
And what kind of questions were there?
It was particularly animated on the subject of hate speech rules. So there have been a couple of incidents recently. One where Scottish police have had a bus advertisements. So in like foot-high letters, these posters that say, "Hey bigots, your time is coming. We will not stand for religiously motivated hate speech." Signed the Scottish police. So the Scottish police are like provoking a fight, saying, "Hey bigots, we're against hate." And the irony was lost on them, apparently. And then the South Yorkshire police, they started advertising on social media that they want people to report hate incidences. It doesn't have to be a crime. It could just be a hate incident. But we want to know this, and we want to. And of course, South Yorkshire Police weren't brilliant at handling a whole bunch of sort of child sex abuse, scandals and all sorts of things. And so people quite rightly wanted to know why they weren't turning their attention to actual crimes when they wanted to punish thought crimes. So Jordan got very animated at that point. He really woke up and said, "What's happening to your country? You need to stop this now."
Wow.
So yeah, that was where he cared the most, I think, seeing free speech trampled on, basically.
Wow. Well, you first came across my radar screen, Glenn, when you did some videos about Jordan Peterson. So let's, where did you grow up? What was your family like? How did you become a Christian? Why did you become a pastor? What's your ministry look like? Why don't you cover some of that territory?
Okay, in 10 words or less.
This is
grew
YouTube.
up in.
We have time.
I know we have time. I grew up in Australia, and it was a church-going home. My mother always had a very, very lively faith, and so we would go along to church. There were certain things that happened in the home when I was growing up. My sisters are a lot older than me, but they discovered a few things that made them want to run a mile from the Christian faith, and I don't blame them for that in a lot of ways. So, but I was a lot younger, and I was sort of the good Christian boy, going along to Sunday school, putting the hand in the air, getting the answers right. If you stick with Jesus, usually a safe bet. And didn't really get it. And by the time I went to university, I think I had a picture of God as the distant individual, high on power, low on personality. That's the sort of the gods that I had sort of assumed to exist, and went away to university thinking I was a Christian, having no real comprehension of who Jesus is. And a friend of mine kept inviting me to church, and I remember going every Sunday night to this church, St. Aldate's in Oxford, and I remember hating the preacher with a great passion, and going back every Sunday to hate him some more. He thought he was so down with the kids. He was using all these contemporary modern examples of the gospel, and I just thought, you think you're cool and you're so not. And but now I'm a preacher. So now I see the same kid with his arms folded at the back, and I think, you just wait, kiddo. That was me. And of course, in the background, there's a praying mother. Yeah. So that's always significant. And then the same friend who invited me to church said, "Let's read the Gospels together." And I just remember getting halfway through Luke's Gospel and just being blown away by the person of Jesus. Just the compassion, the love, the magnetism, the charisma, that he could turn on a dime. I remember as we were going through Matthew 23 and just the denunciation of, "You hypocrites, you Pharisees and teachers of the law, and you brood of vipers," and of course that really sort of resonated with me, because both my sisters sort of walked away from the faith because of hypocrisy, and to see Jesus hot with fury against the religious self-righteous. That was so interesting. And then the very end of that chapter, he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I've longed to gather you like a hen gathers her chicks, but you were not willing." And like he ends that whole chapter of just blistering fury with this heartfelt appeal to come home. I still have the mother hen compassion for you. And I remember just keeping on reading through, and just halfway through Luke's Gospel, I just thought, if this is what God's like, I'm in. This is the God that I could actually trust. If it's the Jesus God, then I jump in with both feet. If it's just the distant individual, well, I'll just carry on, not giving too much thought to these things. But if it's, I've always loved Lord Byron's line. So that Lord Byron, the poet, said, "If God is not like Jesus Christ, he ought to be." Yeah. So that was sort of aged about 2021, and I got a job in the civil service in Australia, which was not. I'm not really suited for an office job, and it didn't do very well there. And then discovered, and it took me a while to figure out, you know what? Actually, like shooting your mouth off about Jesus, that's actually a calling. That's something that people do. So I started working for churches in 2000s, and started working for a church in London, and then back in Canberra in Australia, and then back in London again. And then I went to a sort of seminary, and I got ordained in the Church of England in 2007. And then I came down here to Eastbourne, where I live on the south coast of England, working for a church there. You're a sort of a curate, if you know the term curate. It's like you're a minister with your L plates on. You're sort of in training. Okay. And I was in that training position on staff of All Souls Eastbourne for 4 years. And then at the end of that, I got this job where I am now at this charity that I work for called Speak Life. And I still go to that church and I still preach quite a bit there. But my day job is as an evangelist. So yeah, that's fun.
And so what is Speak Life?
So we used to be known as the Hour of Revival Evangelistic Association, which is quite the mouthful. And that was back in the 50s. There was a guy called Eric Hutchings. He used to be known as the British Billy Graham. And he would go and have these massive crusades, and he would preach and the choir would sing and hundreds would come forward, and it was that kind of thing. He had a radio ministry, and then he died in 1982, I think, with no real plans for legacy or passing it on, and so nothing really happened. And then 30 years later, a large legacy was left to the charity, and they thought, we could actually employ another evangelist. So I'm only the second evangelist to be employed by this charity. There was a 30-year gap in between, and now I'm trying to get really back to not the Crusades thing, but he had this ministry of preaching and media, which back in the day was radio, and these days it's kind of online. So we try to do the same kinds of things and make a noise for Jesus.
Okay. Now, in the UK, in American terms, your outfit would very much be evangelical. And I know evangelical in the UK means something different than it does on the American context. Does evangelical in the UK have a political overtone to it?
Not at all. I could not guess what anyone in my church would have voted for with the referendum on Brexit. I have no idea who people vote for election by election. It's absolutely not segmented like that. There's slightly more in the free church tradition. There's slightly more voting for the Labour Party and the Liberal Party because they have those kinds of foundations. There's slightly more voting, I would guess, for the Conservatives among Anglicans, but among evangelicals, it's just not politically divided at all. And one of the reasons might be because most of the churches that would identify as evangelical in the UK are also Anglican, and I think the Church of England plays chaplain to the whole nation. So anyone in our parish who wants to get married, we can marry them. Anyone who wants to get baptized, we can have a chat about it. And if they really want to, then we baptize. And anyone who wants to be buried, and we bury them. And and anyone who wants to have a conversation about the deep issues of life, they can knock on our door at 2 a.m. And we do play chaplain to the nation because of this parish system. So I just think we can't be politicized as much. Okay. Can't afford to be politicized as much, which is ironic because in the US there's such a separation of church and state is the dogma, and yet religion and politics are kind of like this. Whereas in the UK we've got bishops in the upper house of Parliament, in the House of Lords. They're literally, the bishops get to sit there. The Queen is the governor of the Church of England, and yet actually religion and politics are completely separate. I was talking to the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, which is sort of the third party. There's Conservatives, Labour, and then the Liberal Democrats, which are a much smaller party these days. But he made an interesting comment just the other day. He said, in America, you've got to pretend to have a faith to get on in politics. And in Britain, you've got to pretend not to have a faith to get on in politics.
That's fascinating. Now, yesterday I did a little video about Noel Plum, and he was explaining I don't know if you saw that video. He was explaining.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Christianity is, or no, Jordan Peterson is good for Christians because it'll help them in their expressive individualism, be happier, but bad for Christianity because he plays into the Church of England being, on the fence about the only N.T. Wright. I played a clip from N.T. Wright in there that the only issue in the Church of England is, do they or don't they believe that, Jesus had skin on when he walked out of the tomb. So
yes.
So what was your take on Mr. Plum in the game room's take on the Church of England?
Well, I just think I think it was correct. Well, what I don't think he got right was, in order to quote from Anglicans who are just so utterly liberal they don't even believe in the resurrection anymore, he actually had to go back to David Jenkins, who was Bishop of Durham. Well, he retired from that in 1994. And of course, since he was Bishop of Durham, there was another much more famous Bishop of Durham who was N.T. Wright himself. And David Jenkins was such an outlier in his own day. And then the other person he quoted was Giles Fraser, who is known as the loose canon. He was the canon of St. Paul's Cathedral, and he writes a column in the Guardian newspaper. But he is by no means representative of the theological tenor of the Church of England. We've got an Archbishop of Canterbury who identifies as evangelical. The Archbishop of York, who is number 2 in terms of the structures of the Church of England, is also evangelical. So I disagreed with that. And then on the stats, yeah, there are churches absolutely hemorrhaging numbers. But what's interesting is when you dive down into the numbers, actually the churches that most hold a more traditional ethical line and spend much more time in the scriptures, they are actually the churches that are increasing in attendance. So the Diocese of London is a much more conservative diocese than the rest of the dioceses, and it's one of the only really growing and dynamic dioceses in the Church of England. And evangelical churches are just about holding their own, maybe even increasing a little bit, while other liberal parts of that denomination and other denominations are absolutely going down the tubes. So I can agree with that. I can agree that people who start to say it doesn't matter what's happening, to Jesus and whether he's risen from the dead. It's true that if you swallow that hook, line, and sinker, then you'll be relevant for about 3.5 minutes, and then you won't have a church in 3.5 years. So that's true. That's true. But I don't think that's what Jordan Peterson is doing. I don't see why he's making that link, really, to Anglican theology.
So what do you think Jordan Peterson is doing? I mean, your videos about him, I listened to him again this morning. The churches are, so there's lots of, Peterson is in a sense a Rorschach test. And when I run my meetups, people come in and in many ways they hear the Peterson they want to hear, or others hear the Peterson that they want to hear in a negative way. This is the one who's standing against progress, and he's a bigot, and he's misogynist, and he's transphobic. So Peterson does act like a mirror, and people see in him a funhouse mirror. People see in him the distortions they're looking for. But what do you think is? And so Christians are listening to him, and they're like, well, this live as if, and some of the other issues that come up, Jung, Darwin, so on and so forth, especially from evangelicals. But clearly he's having an impact. Why? Why do you think?
I don't think it's what Noah Plum says in terms of because he's so rational and he makes it intellectually respectable to be Christian again. I don't think it's really so much about the intellectual side of things. I think he cares, and I think he's pastoral, and I think that psychological side of things. I think he's the father we wish we had, and I think he is fathering a lot of guys, really, and speaking deeply and wisely to them about rules for living. So, it's just interesting that it's a self-help book that kind of defines his phenomenon. It's not, here are 12 arguments for the Jungian Darwinian framework. That doesn't sound like Jordan Peterson to me. What sounds is here are 12 rules for life, and stand up straight with your shoulders back, and come on, you can do it, and take up your cross and march to the top of the hill and take as much responsibility as you can. And this call to responsibility and adventure is what people are responding to. And yes, it helps that he can ground things scientifically and within a Darwinian framework. I guess that helps with a lot of people. But I don't think it's because he makes it intellectually respectable. I think it's because he cares. And what I've responded to in his teaching has been that he treats the Bible as a human document that is meant to humanize us. It's addressed to humans, and its intention is to humanize, which is just so helpful. Even as a Christian, it's just so helpful, because I'm just surrounded by preachers who constantly treat the book as though it's this specialized text for specialized people called Christians to live a specialized life and tweak your discipleship over here. And for him to just restore the book to the center of cultural conversation and to say, it is a human document, and Christians shouldn't run away from that. Of course, it's a human document. We think something else is going on as well, but we also think it's a very human document addressed to humankind en masse, and it humanizes people. So I've loved that. I've loved his existentialism. I've loved the way he, when he's asked about what he believes, he's not really interested in the question. I quite like that. It sounds a lot like the book of James in the New Testament. The devil's got a very, realized theology. The devil understands a lot about stuff, and shudders, but that's not what a Christian should be interested in primarily. So, and his idea that the reason why he's not interested in just articulating a set of dogmas is because what the hell do you know about what you think you believe? You're not transparent to yourself, which just seems thoroughly in keeping with a rounded anthropology that some atheists have, like Jonathan Haidt, and all Christians should have. Because of what we believe about humankind, and we are self-justifying fools and all that kind of stuff. I think he gets human beings largely correct. So I think that's what people are responding to.
Okay, but now he's being the uncle. He cares. Oprah cares. Dr. Phil cares. Dr. Oz cares. There's no end of, at least in the United States scene, in the New Age segment of American spirituality. Well, caring is, gosh, people are falling all over themselves to care. And but here we have this guy who doesn't go to church. His answers about some pretty core. I mean, nobody's really pigeonholed him on the virgin birth yet, which would be another fun conversation with him. But the impact he's having is not just that people are cleaning their room, but that people are reading the Bible, and then, partially through Jonathan Pageau, people are, one of the things that I've noted in my meetups is I've got people coming in and, they're checking out the Orthodox Church. Now, to get into an evangelical church in America, a lot of evangelical churches, you come in one Sunday, raise your hand and say, I want to be baptized. And boy, they're going to grab you and put you in the water fast. The Orthodox Church, okay, right. Well, let's start the process of catechism. You're going to be doing that for at least a year, and then maybe we'll consider baptizing you and letting you near the table. So he is doing something really interesting that goes beyond kind of a self-help fad. And for me, when I began to realize this, that really said, I want to figure this out. I want to know what is going on I want to know what's going on underneath the surface, how, okay, people are showing up in church. That's way beyond him caring and cleaning up their rooms. So what's that about, do you think?
I think one thing would be Dr. Phil and Oprah and Dr. Oz don't examine their shadow side, right? They're not doing a lot of integration work with their shadow. So, and so this is coming from Jung, it's coming from the Bible, it's coming from Solzhenitsyn, but I'm not hearing it as much from him, but that's certainly in his biblical lectures and certainly in his lectures at the University of Toronto, that comes across very, very strongly. And I think people are gripped by that. And you would expect that not not to create an audience, because you'd think, well, I'm no Hitler, and not like that, you know. But there is something, I think there is something about a doctrine of sin that that really communicates and really resonates with people on a very deep level. And if someone who themselves has really been puzzling this out, and themselves comes across with that humility that Jordan Peterson comes across with, he has clearly faced down his shadow. He's clearly faced down that part of himself that could have been a Nazi guard. Yeah. Yeah. And when he says that, it's not a trite thing, which sometimes they are sinners, and you know, but when he puts flesh and bones on that kind of statement and says, yeah, the Nazi evil also resides in my heart. Wow, I do think that makes people sit up and listen in a way that just telling people that they are perfectible, you know, largely decent human beings who just need a plan, or just need a bit of affirmation. That's not how we tick, and I don't. And when I'm constantly bombarded by affirmations, my heart just says, well, if you're constantly affirming, you don't know me. You don't. Yeah. It doesn't work, actually. Yeah. And so, you know, the old Lutheran and Reformed pastors would talk about law and gospel. And I think Jordan Peterson does the law very well. You know, he needs a bit of gospel as well, but he does the law so well. And I think it just resonates and grips people.
And it's, you know, another thing that caught my attention was that, so I have some wonderful friends who are amazing preachers and pastors in Toronto, and there are plenty of empty seats for free available. And, you know, the Church of England, I'm sure, has plenty. This message, as you mentioned, the churches. So I was having a conversation with a young man from New York City who's actually been going to a number of conservative Reformed churches in New York City, and one of the complaints that he had was, you know, even in Calvinist churches, a clear articulation of our need is wanting and lacking. And even when we do so, it doesn't have the strange appeal that Peterson seems to have managed to do it with. Yesterday in the comment section, someone brought up Mark Driscoll, who, of course, out in Mars Hill in Seattle. And Driscoll was a very controversial, very popular Reformed minister, young, restless, and Reformed. Mm-hmm. And they made a connection between Peterson and Driscoll. And I thought, there's something there too. But how, you know, you would think if the church, we've had this stuff for a very long time, and here Peterson comes along, and, you know, if Peterson were talking weekly in a 1,000-seat church in Toronto, people would be flying into Toronto to hear him for free in a heartbeat, and they'd line up afterwards to shake his hand. And that's not the case for me. So It's not the case for my friends in Toronto. What mojo does Peterson have that the church has lacked? It's a hard question.
Yeah. I think there is the pastoral side of things. There's the fact that he cares. I think there is
preachers care. I mean, preachers are in one old song, preachers are quivering masses of availability. I mean, that's part of the problem. I care. And even, you know, I look at, you know, a lot of British culture that I see is British comedy, and the image of the vicar in British comedy is, you know, this guy who sits around and he's just full of emotional availability. He'll care about anything, especially if he died.
Yeah. But niceness is not the same as compassion, and yeah. So
and Peterson isn't that nice.
No, there's a stern fatherly, side of things, and that's why it's an interesting comparison with Driscoll, because Driscoll's, Driscoll complementarian, if you like, on the genders, and Peterson complementarian on masculinity, femininity, and Driscoll's a shouty Peterson. I don't know, maybe. I don't know. I think because he clears the ground with the seriousness of our shadow. I think when he lands the scriptural truths, and when he lands things from the Sermon on the Mount, for instance, in 12 Rules for Life, I think he has so diagnosed the problem that, I mean, the scriptures. It's difficult to think of Christian books where the scriptures land so heavily, where the scriptures actually land in your heart with a kind of a weight that you think, this is wisdom. Even in Christian books where you would think, the scriptures would fit in a lot easier. Yeah. So I guess I'm defaulting back to my law answer. He diagnoses the problem, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, and this is, so some people think I need to see, I myself should see a good psychologist besides Jordan Peterson, because I spent over a year trying to figure this guy out. And part of it is, as a pastor, and I would imagine for you as an evangelist, you would be over the moon if you were getting the kind of attention and traction as Jordan Peterson. If you were being asked to be on, all kinds of TV shows and talk shows, and I would be over the moon if my church were brimming, and there's, and I don't, obviously we don't simply see this as popularity, but he's been ironically, potentially one of the most effective and interesting evangelists of the last, he's only had the attention for a year or two, for the last couple of years. And now a lot of people are going to doubt that. And there's good reason for doubt. We don't know where the buckos, which is just a word I use because how to describe these followers of Peterson. We don't know where this is going to land with these people. It could be that Peterson ignites a flame, and some people, say, "Oh, I want to be Orthodox," but next week they want to be, whoever knows what. We don't know if the basement dwellers are going to actually get out of the basement, or if this is just their latest YouTube channel. And the end of the Truman Show, that wonderful movie, the ending of it was, everything's building to the climax, and Truman walks off of the Christoph's sound stage, and then everyone just turns the channel. That could happen with this. And I'm fully aware of that. But the thing that has dogged me in this has been the poverty. Peterson has exposed the poverty of the church in a very compelling way. And that's something that we should, I think, ponder deeply on. Peterson mentioned in that interview with GQ UK, British GQ, whatever they call themselves, he's given his evangelistic crusade / book tour. He's spoken to 250,000 people in person over the last year or so. He has, when he came to Sacramento and they did the VIP, I got someone very generously offered me a VIP ticket. And so I was early on in the line, and then I sat fairly close to where he was greeting people. And just like he says on many interviews, and tears up when he says so, people come up to him, and, hundreds of people, thousands of people come up to him and tearfully say, "My life was heading in a bad direction, and I read your book and I listened to your lectures, and it put me on a better track, and my life is much better now." There's a power there. Now, obviously, it's easy for us as Christian ministers to theologically diagnose what Peterson is doing and critique it. and I've certainly done plenty of that. And I'll continue to recognize there's a stoicism in him. We are dragging our own crosses up the hill for Peterson. It isn't Christ carrying the cross. Now, Christ does admonish us to take up our crosses as well. So there's plenty of theological space in there to work. But he has, in some ways, at least in this tiny little moment, exposed the poverty of a good deal of Christian ministry and done something that I think we as Christian ministers should stop and give us and cause us to examine ourselves.
And what is it? What is he doing that we're not?
I'm still figuring that out. This is why I've been obsessed with this. I want to know what he's doing. I want to know why he's having the impact he's having. And perhaps part of that is mercenary on my part because, I want to do what he does. Well, except, the thing was that once I began to realize what was happening, I, who am pastor of a very small congregation that is aging and, very much could look like a number of places in the Church of England, now suddenly, and for years, people aren't knocking on my door and sending me emails and asking to have conversations with me. I try to work through and diagnose Peterson, and suddenly I've got, a queue of people who would love to have a conversation with me. And what Christian minister doesn't want people coming to them and saying, "Can we talk about the Bible?"
Right.
I mean,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not sure if that's in my job description. What do you mean, can we talk about the Bible? Can we talk about Christianity? Can we talk about, the Creator is the Redeemer? Yes, we can talk about this. But why was it this quirky, rough man from Northern Alberta who teaches psychology in Toronto that linked this? And why was it that I could just go to meetup.com and say Jordan Peterson Meetup, and every week have 12 people, many of them for the first time, who are willing to walk into a church and say, "I want to talk about Jordan Peterson." And most of the time we're not spending talking about Jordan Peterson. We're talking about all the kinds of things he's raising for them. And those are all the kinds of things that sit right in the center of a pastoral plate. So, and
do you think it might be?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Do you think it might be so prodigal son? So you've got Luke chapter 15. Here's the father. Here's the two boys. There's the bad boy, the good boy. Bad boy runs off to the far country, wants to be free. He gets lost. He's in the pigsty, and he comes up with his pigsty plan. How many of my father's men have more than enough to eat? And here I am starving to death. I will go back to him and I will say, "Let me be one of your hired men." And I just think that's kind of an interesting plan for those who find themselves in a pigsty. Those who find themselves in the land of chaos want a course correction, desperate for a course correction, and they want an antidote to chaos. And what they naturally want, though, is to be a hired man, to be a hired servant. And of course, the hired servant relationship is the order relationship. It's the older brother kind of relationship who slaves for the father and that kind of thing. And I just wonder whether, part of what we're seeing is people who they've had enough of the far country. They've realized that, if you're lost, the last person you need to find is yourself. You kind of need, because finding a lost person is never much help. I don't know if you've noticed that.
I've nenever heard phrased that way before. So I'm going to keep
right.
That, so.
Okay, it's yours. It's yours.
Pastors are not only liars, they're also thieves.
Totally. Where would we be without thievery? So, and I just wonder whether Peterson is kind of calling the younger brothers home, but calling them far more towards the hired man kind of relationship. And some of them are finding the father, the true father, that relationship with God as a child, and that freedom. And some of them are finding more order in their life than there was chaos. But I do wonder with the order and chaos thing whether in the Bible, there's order and there's chaos and there's grace. And I don't think either order or chaos are the grace option. And whether part of the job. So I was talking to a guy just up in Newcastle. I was preaching, and he was one of these guys who was saying, "Yeah, I need to take more responsibility for my life." Turns out he's a massive Peterson fan, and we just sat down and had a look at Luke chapter 15, and just the fact that it's much better if you're in a pigsty to want to be a hired man, right, but it's even better to be a child in the household.
Right.
And that seemed to kind of resonate with him. And that's what I'm sort of trying to do. But that's me diagnosing what's lacking in Peterson, whereas you're asking the much more interesting question, which is how is he diagnosing what we're lacking in the church? And that's a totally
exposing what we're lacking. That's the key. I mean, the church is, he is exposing the church. And this isn't, he's not exposing the church in terms of, the Roman Catholic pedophile scandal. He's exposing the church in its weakness, and not in its weakness like Christ's weakness. He's exposing the church in its banality and its worthlessness. And and that, so I think of, and when I think about, so I was also thinking about the parable of the prodigal son. The younger son is the son who goes away. Well, let's say the younger son comes back and becomes the older brother. Well, I love Tim Keller's sermon on the prodigal son, because here's the irony is that, well, okay, maybe you do clean your room, maybe you do get that job, maybe you do marry the girl that you've been taking years of her life from, and maybe you now marry her and you have children, and okay, now you become the elder brother. Well, as Tim Keller's great sermon notes, that brother needs gospel too, because there are two different ways to be your own Savior and Lord. So, I very much understand the limitation of, Peterson doesn't even use the word gospel, and I understand the limitations of his message, but something is happening here that I think we as a church need to pay attention to, and I haven't figured it out yet. I do believe, and maybe a couple of years from now, Peterson gets a daytime talk show, and bit by bit by bit, his rough edge wears off. I don't know if that'll happen. He'll be a Megyn Kelly. If he's on daytime TV, he can't contain himself that long. He'll say something to someone and he'll get fired from ABC. That's just what'll happen. But
yes. Yes. No, without a doubt. And I mean, I've heard him describe, he's on 100-foot wave, and he can see very few ways that this will end well. Which, he has such stunning kind of self-awareness with that. I think one of the things he exposes about the church is he just routinely says a whole bunch of stuff that we had assumed was unsayable. And we thought we couldn't possibly say that. And if we did, we would lose any kind of credibility and audience. And he just says it and then doubles down on it and triples down on it and wins the audience.
But there are jerk pastors out there, and maybe you don't have many of them in the UK. We have plenty in the US who go on all the time to say offensive things that might be, quite true, but they don't have the impact that Peterson has. I mean, they're just everyone just knows them as jerks. So nobody, the news group, Westboro Baptist gets press coverage, but none of us want to identify with Westboro Baptist for lots of good reasons. Because we don't believe that they, I don't believe that they in any way express the gospel of Jesus Christ in what they do.
No.
But
not even close.
Peterson goes on. So I don't know. I have not figured it out. And I know the Jungians will be out there and they'll say, well, obviously, I mean, they're waiting in some cases for, the second coming of Carl Jung as their savior. And you can find Carl Jung's grave.
Yes. Is Peterson the one, or should we expect another? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I know that's going to tick some people off in my in my following, but no, that's been and so what I really what this, so at one point I have a meetup and we had about 30 people in for a meetup, and somebody asked me, were more people here for the Jordan Peterson meetup than were here for church this morning? And I thought, no, but if this trend line keeps going, that might happen. And if so, what? And so then it really leads me to ask hard questions about what, how, if so then I start traveling around, I start helping other people launch meetups in other cities in California. And again, I have no idea the shelf life this thing is going to have. I have no idea how much enduring interest he is going to have. I have no idea how much long-term impact he will have in people's lives. It's way too early to know any of that. But it does lead me to ask questions about what should we be learning from him in terms of understanding how to talk about Jesus in this present context. Mm-hmm. Some people say, well, he doesn't talk about Jesus. No, he does. He does talk about Jesus. We might say Jesus is Lord, but we're, say, ripping off a slogan from the first century. We're ripping off the Roman emperor slogans. Roman emperors, there are not a lot of them around anymore. He, in a sense, is doing something in the present context. And when he says Jesus is at the top, Jesus is the archetype of the perfect human being. I never had a thought of saying it that way. And that way is connecting with people. And I don't want to just be a Me Too evangelist that says, "Oh, all the young kids are doing music or movies," the kind of preacher you used to resent to go listen to. So I really and I don't think the best way to go about this is kind of what's in the evangelical hip pocket, which is, oh, Jordan Peterson is bringing a crowd. Let's all kind of go with the flow, and then we'll cap it off with, oh, and then Jesus, and here's baptism. That ain't going to work either. That is not going to work. So I don't know. And that's why I'm talking to people, because I learn from people.
And it's not Jesus smuggling with Peterson, which is sort of the line that Douglas Murray kind of brought up in one of the debates. It's not Jesus smuggling, because it's this ground up, it's this cathedral-like vision for reality that your average evangelical kind of approach to evangelism is, look, here's the leaflet, here's the thumbnail plan, and this is in as low resolution as possible. Let me download the data on you that you can get. So it's giving you the leaflet that describes a thumbnail of a plan of the cathedral. And Peterson's approach is, let me just, in a really meandering way, and how long have you got? You got 3 hours? Come on in. And, and I don't know why we spent all that time in the crypt, but he's into it. And so, and passion communicates, right? Yes. And it's giving you this vision, and you don't understand the cathedral. You have no idea how this bit relates to that bit, but he seems to think it does. Yes. And yes. And you need to watch about 15 different videos to kind of to come on board. Yep. But that is how humans tick, right? It's kind of, it's the difference between, watching The Wire, when you're watching the first 4 episodes of The Wire, and like, I have no idea who these people are. I can't understand this Baltimore accent, but I'm gripped. I don't know why I'm gripped. I don't know where this is going. And you're tempted to just like look up Wikipedia and like, who is this guy again? And how is he related to this person? But The Wire is a lot more how people like tick than the Wikipedia page. That's right. And so much of my tribe does the Wikipedia page and just tries to boil things down to as simplistically as you can. And so I've got a gospel outline called 3-2-1, and it might sound like it's a simplistic thing, because I walk you through in 3 steps. Okay, here's the gospel. But step number 1, God is a loving union of 3. So it's Trinity. Okay, let's dive deeply into that. This is not I'm not starting with the simple stuff. Okay, here's Trinity, and then 2 is Adam and Christ. Not the most obvious thing to then go to, and then 1 is you're one with Adam, be one with Christ. So, I mean, I did not pick the three simplest doctrines, in order to do this thing. But I actually think persuasion is not so much the stepping stone thing. I don't think it's trying to like have stepping stones from your house to my house. And I don't think it's about throwing stones at your house. I basically think it's about like throwing open the doors and saying, come on over. I know from the outside, this thing looks a mess and it looks really weird. And, I know you've heard the residents of the house squabbling upstairs, and I know we haven't done the best job, but can I just give you the grand tour? And it's the cathedral tour. It's the meandering. Life is more weird and wonderful than you'd ever imagined, that people love and they're responding to, when all the time what we want to do is download the little 90-second thing on people. So I think that's part of I think he gets our anthropology right. And we ought to have a more rounded anthropology like that. But I think we've been far too enlightenment, and people like Haidt and Peterson are calling us on that.
Yeah. I think part of it too is he is himself quite clearly embodying the hero. I mean, the status rocket that he's been on since 2016, and I think people see that and they want to emulate it. I think that's deep within us, and I think that's part of his attraction. But yeah, people will have problems with when I say it, but I do believe God is doing something powerful through him. And I did a video a couple of days ago on the unauthorized exorcist, Mark 9, and that and so the disciples are like, why is he doing that using your name, Jesus?
Let's stop him. Yeah.
That's right. Let's stop him, because we don't want those people getting, having those demons cast out and not having our little stamp of approval on it. And Jesus says, leave him alone. Leave him alone.
Yeah.
And
he's not against us.
That's right. And I think about, the last chapter of the Gospel of John, when Jesus is dealing with Peter, and Peter looks over at John and says, hey, what about him? And Jesus says, what's that? What's that to you? You follow me. And I think Jesus says that to his church, with respect to Peterson. If I want to use Jordan Peterson to see, I had been seeing a lot of one-way traffic going down the Sam Harris Road or some other roads, and saying, once people start going down that road, they don't come back again to the church. And what happened after Jordan Peterson was people start coming back, and it's like, I didn't think the Spirit of God could do that. But what I really didn't think was that the Spirit of God could use someone that looked like that to do that. And it's really threatening in the church when we say, the Spirit of God can use someone who is unauthorized, someone who won't go to church, someone who has some pretty critical things to say to the church. And I think, when we start believing that, we've made ourselves into idols, and we no longer are in fact servants of our great Lord. And when the Lord says, I'm going to do this, we say, yes, Lord, I will be with you wherever you go. So I don't know. That's what I'm saying.
Whoever gets the credit. Yeah. And we will rejoice. It was interesting. On the day I went to see Jordan Peterson up in Oxford, Facebook reminded me that 6 years ago to the day, I was up in Oxford debating the chief executive of the British Humanist Association. And it was a really interesting and brilliant event, and I loved doing it, but it was very much, he's a friend of Dawkins, and he's very much in that mold. Andrew Copson is his name, and there was the Oxford branch of the Atheist and Secular Humanist Association was there, and we had some fantastic conversations. But that was the 2012 moment, and that was the kind of faith, non-faith dialogue that was being had. And then it was just so interesting that 6 years to the day, I was back in Oxford, and I was thinking to myself, I reckon so many of the same people who were in that crowd for that debate would be in this theater listening to Jordan Peterson, and how times have changed and how the conversation has moved on.
Yeah.
But I just wonder which one is the blip.
Yeah.
Because, I think maybe the New Atheist thing was the blip.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. Obviously, I don't think they get God right, but also I just don't think they get people right.
Yeah. No,
And you can't last for very long if you don't get people right.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of an enlightenment rationality thing, it has to run out.
Yeah. Well, we've been going on for about an hour. Any last things you wanted to get in that we didn't talk about?
I'm just going to have to keep watching you, Paul, for giving me the answers that I want. Like, yeah, what is it? What's he doing that we're not? But
I don't know. And again, to me, it's the Truman Show fascination, because I was so happy to see that interview with GQ, British GQ, because I hadn't watched a Jordan Peterson interview and had that much fun in a long time. And it seemed like, well, he's the poor beefeater is wearing down with all this stuff, but he's still got some fight in him. And she was a wonderful conversation partner and a wonderful challenger, because she could, she didn't get upset. She didn't get defensive. She held her ground, and they were able to challenge each other. And it was terrific. But I do believe God is doing something with this. And my desire would be that more in the church could stop feeling like John in Mark 9 and say, he should stop, and rather listen to their Lord and say, I am Jesus, and I am Lord, and I will deal with Jordan Peterson as I see fit, and I will use him as I see fit. You must follow me.
Right.
And
right.
When I see, and what I desperately want is that people who listen to Jordan Peterson, and they can't reach him because, how are they going to talk to the guy? Because he's got all this, his status rocket has taken them out of reach for them. But what I desperately want is that these people can go to a church and meet a pastor who's not going to blow them off. And I hear those stories all the time. And actually begin to find the church to be helpful in terms, they're coming to the church and saying, I don't really know a lot about the Bible. And so for the church to figure out how to talk about the Bible in a helpful way for them.
Yeah.
And have the church come alongside them, and they say, I've got these addiction challenges. I've got these behavioral challenges. And what I really need is someone who cares and supports, and for the church to be able to come around and be helpful. Because, Billy Graham, was wise enough, he had his moment in the 50s and 60s, but he brought the church with him and tried to at least mobilize the church. And I find churches often hostile to Peterson on the right and on the left. And my prayer is that the church will stop and say, hey, people are coming to you and saying, I want to learn about the Bible. What's so hard about this? And maybe shut up a little bit when they talk about the Bible and figure out, well, what might be helpful for them? What are the questions they are actually asking? And have a conversation with them. Don't be the know-it-all answer man older brother. When the older brother comes back into the fold, don't sit outside in the field and say, so that's my prayer. That's my prayer in all this.
Right, because how does the father respond to the returning boy? He runs to him, throws his arms around him, throws the feast, and he doesn't let him ask to be the slave.
That's right.
I love that when he practices the speech. Says he practices the speech and he says, "Let me be one of your hired men."
That's right.
But then when he comes to give the speech, the father cuts him off.
Right.
I don't want a slave.
No.
I want a son. I want a boy. And
that's right.
And then what Peterson then I think helps you with is I often imagine the next day, the next day the prodigal son kind of waking up and just sort of padding down to the kitchen and there's dad making some eggs and the younger son says, Dad, about last night, and about this whole thing, I'm really sorry. And the father just says, shut up and eat your eggs.
Yeah.
And then, at some point,
that's right.
the son says, what do you want to do today, Dad? And Dad says, I don't know. What do you want to do today? And off you go. And then it's the embodied logos.
Yeah.
It's what you want to do now as this freed son.
Right. Well, and actually, I think the
embodied.
father will say, well, son, I sold a third of my property when you took it to the far off country. So let's go out to the field, and they're calving today. So let's get out there with the workmen.
Right.
And let's do our work
right.
in this
totally
in this
totally
green earth.
Totally. And I totally think that, like, one of the things I think Jordan Peterson fears about Protestants is that we won't have a work ethic, which I don't know, historically we seem to have managed a work ethic, but it's like, but I think his fear is that the gospel kind of removes.
That's right. Calvinists don't know anything about guilt. Have you?
You're a psychologist, you said? Yeah. But it's like, my thing is that, like the shift from the Old Testament to the New Testament is not that you have, 1 day in 7 is rest, and then in the New Testament is 7 days in 7 rest. It's the shift of, in the Old Testament, you work towards that day of rest. In the New Testament, you begin with rest. That's right. Like the first day of the week, day off, enjoy the Lord. Now let's walk out into the world. Right. And those 12 rules for life might prove really helpful as you, from that place of rest, out you go. But
that's right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Now stay on the line. I'm going to stop the recording, but thank you so much for taking the time to talk. And, I praise God for your ministry, and I would love nothing better than to see you be at least as effective as Jordan Peterson.
I'm not sure I want that job. I really don't. The dude looks tired.
well, thank you very much, Glenn.
Really appreciate your ministry. Love watching your videos. Thank you for all you do.